In the sprawling expanse of the Galactic Defense Academy, where alien species from across the known universe train side by side, there exists an unspoken hierarchy. The Zephyrians, with their lightning-fast reflexes, dominate aerial combat simulations. The crystalline quartz beings excel in strategic planning with their multidimensional thinking. The massive Goliathan warriors crush every physical challenge with brute force that can shatter starship hulls. And then there are the humans, the newest species to join the Academy, barely a decade since first contact. Dismissed as physically weak, technologically primitive, and lacking any notable special abilities. Most alien cadets assumed humans were only admitted out of political courtesy, a token gesture to the species that somehow stumbled into galactic civilization. But what happens when the quiet human cadet who never speaks up in class, who sits alone during mealtimes, who barely passes the standard combat assessments, suddenly receives a combat designation that sends shockwaves through every military frequency in the galaxy? What happens when that same cadet's name becomes whispered in both fear and awe across alien worlds? This is the story of Cadet Elena Vasquez, whose silence spoke louder than any battle cry, and whose true nature would redefine what it means to be human in a universe that thought it had us all figured out. Some secrets are worth keeping quiet, until the moment they change everything. Elena Vasquez pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the Academy corridor, watching the morning rush of cadets flow past like a river of scales, fur, and exotic skin patterns. Her small human frame barely registered among the towering Goliathans whose footsteps shook the deck plating, or the graceful Zephyrians whose wings created gentle breezes as they glided between classes. She clutched her datapad closer to her chest and checked the time display. Advanced Combat Theory with Professor Krixtal started in 10 minutes, and she had learned the hard way that being late to a Manthari's class resulted in very uncomfortable questions asked in front of 200 alien cadets. The insectoid professor had a particular talent for making humans feel even smaller than they already appeared to their classmates. "Move aside, soft skin," rumbled a voice above her head. Elena looked up to see Throckmore, a Goliathan cadet whose gray hide bore the ritual scars of his homeworld's warrior culture. At nearly 9 feet tall and built like a living mountain, Throckmore had never missed an opportunity to remind the human cadets of their physical limitations. Elena stepped aside without a word, as she always did. The massive alien pushed past her with his usual entourage of sycophantic cadets from various species, all eager to bask in the reflected glory of someone destined for command positions. She watched them disappear around the corner, their animated conversation about the upcoming war games trials fading into the general noise of the Academy. The Galactic Defense Academy housed over 50,000 cadets representing 37 different species from across known space. It was considered the most prestigious military institution in the galaxy, training the future officers who would defend civilization against the ever-present threat of the Void Swarms, nightmarish entities from dark space that consumed entire star systems. Every species contributed their unique strengths to this cosmic defense force. Everyone except humans, who seemed to contribute nothing but additional paperwork. Elena made her way through the crowds to the massive lecture hall that served as Professor Krixtal's domain. The amphitheater-style seating accommodated beings of vastly different sizes and physiologies, from the tiny, fairy-like luminari who perched on special platforms to the massive Titan-class species who required reinforced seating. Humans, being roughly average in size, but unremarkable in every other way, typically found seats in the less desirable middle sections. She slipped into her usual spot 3 rows from the back, hoping to avoid notice. The seat next to her remained empty, as it had for the past 8 months since she arrived at the Academy. Not out of malice, necessarily. Her classmates weren't cruel, just indifferent. Why would a Zephyrian flight candidate or a court strategic specialist bother forming friendships with someone whose species had contributed exactly 0 notable victories to galactic history? The holographic display at the front of the lecture hall flickered to life as Professor Crixtal entered with his characteristic precise, measured steps. The Manthari's 4 arms moved in perfect coordination as he prepared his materials, while his compound eyes surveyed the assembled cadets. Elena had often wondered if those multifaceted eyes saw her at all, or if she simply blended into the background noise of academic mediocrity. Today we examine the Battle of Nexus Prime, Professor Crixtal announced in his clicking, translated voice. An engagement that demonstrated the importance of species specialization in modern warfare. The Zephyrians provided unmatched aerial reconnaissance. The Quartz coordinated logistics across 17 star systems simultaneously, and the Goliathans led frontal assaults that broke enemy formations. Elena opened her note-taking application and began transcribing, though she could probably recite these examples from memory. Every case study followed the same pattern. Successful operations where each alien species contributed to their natural advantages, while humans remained conspicuously absent from the historical record. The humans, Professor Crixtal continued, and Elena felt the familiar tightening in her stomach that came whenever her species was mentioned in class, provided support personnel, and equipment maintenance. Polite silence filled the lecture hall. No one laughed outright. That would be culturally insensitive. But Elena could feel the weight of 200 pairs of alien eyes briefly turning toward the scattered humans in the audience, acknowledging their presence with the same mild interest one might show toward particularly useful furniture. Cadet Zeph Allen, a Zephyrian with iridescent blue wings, raised one wing hand. Professor, why were humans admitted to the academy if they lack combat specializations? Wouldn't additional cadets from established warrior species be more beneficial? The question hung in the air like an uncomfortable truth that everyone thought, but rarely voiced. Elena's fingers stilled on her data pad as she waited for the professor's response, though she suspected she already knew what he would say. An excellent question, Cadet Zeph Allen, Professor Crixtal replied, his mandibles clicking approvingly. The Galactic Council's decision to include humanity in the Academy program was based on several factors. First, their recent entry into galactic civilization represents significant potential for cultural integration. Second, their homeworld's location provides strategic value for our defensive perimeter. And third, he paused, seeming to search for diplomatic phrasing. Their enthusiasm for learning warfare techniques, while perhaps not matched by natural ability, demonstrates admirable determination. Elena forced herself to keep taking notes, though her handwriting became slightly more irregular. Enthusiasm, determination, the kinds of qualities adults praised in children who tried very hard but would probably never excel at anything important. She had heard variations of this explanation countless times, from admissions interviews to orientation speeches to casual conversations overheard in dining halls. The lecture continued with detailed analysis of battle formations and tactical decisions, illustrated by three-dimensional holographic recreations that showed Zephyrian wings dancers weaving through enemy fire, Goliathan shield walls advancing under impossible bombardment, and Quartz tactical networks processing millions of data points per second. Elena watched it all with the detached interest of someone studying a game she would never be allowed to play. When class ended, the exodus followed predictable patterns. The elite cadets, those destined for command tracks and special operations, gathered in animated discussion groups. Future pilots clustered around Zeph Allen and his wingmates, their conversation full of technical flight terminology that translated poorly into galactic standard. The heavy assault specialists gravitated toward Throckmore and his Goliathan cohort, comparing strength training regimens and discussing the finer points of siege warfare. Elena packed her datapad and waited for the crowds to thin before making her way toward the exit. She had learned to time her movements to avoid the rush, finding that moving against the flow of alien cadets only highlighted her outsider status. Cadet Vasquez. She turned, surprised to hear her name. Professor Krixtal approached with his typical measured gait, his multiple arms carrying various teaching materials with mechanical precision. Yes, Professor. Your analysis of the Nexus Prime logistics networks was quite thorough, he said, consulting a data tablet with one of his secondary hands. Your understanding of supply chain vulnerabilities was particularly insightful. Elena blinked. She had submitted the analysis 3 days ago and assumed it had vanished into the professor's grading system along with hundreds of other routine assignments. Thank you, Professor. I am curious, Krixtal continued, his compound eyes focusing on her with uncomfortable intensity. Your academic performance is consistently adequate across all subjects, yet your understanding of complex strategic systems appears more sophisticated than your test scores suggest. Do you find our examination methods insufficient for demonstrating your capabilities? The question caught Elena off guard. In 8 months at the academy, no instructor had suggested that her performance might be limited by external factors rather than simple lack of ability. She considered her response carefully, aware that this conversation might be the longest direct interaction she had ever had with a faculty member. The examination formats are fair, Professor. I think humans simply process information differently than other species. We might reach correct conclusions through different pathways. Interesting hypothesis, Krixtal mused, making notes on his tablet. Tell me, Cadet Vasquez, what do you believe is humanity's greatest strength as a species? Elena hesitated. Every other species had obvious answers to this question: Zephyrian speed, Goliathan strength, Quartz analytical capacity. But humans seem to be the galactic equivalent of a participation trophy, admitted to the Academy for diplomatic reasons rather than military value. I'm not sure we have one, Professor. At least not compared to other species here. Perhaps, Krixtal replied, though something in his translated tone suggested disagreement. Or perhaps you simply have not yet discovered what makes your species unique. The galaxy has a long history of underestimating civilizations that do not fit conventional patterns. With that cryptic comment, the professor dismissed her with a polite nod and continued on his way. Elena stood in the emptying lecture hall, wondering if she had just been insulted, encouraged, or simply subjected to a philosophical observation that meant nothing at all. The rest of her day followed familiar routines. Physical training where she performed adequately, but unremarkably compared to her alien classmates. Technical systems courses where human dexterity proved useful for detailed maintenance work, but hardly impressive compared to species with natural technological interfaces. Weapons training where she qualified with standard armaments while watching Goliathans handle heavy weapons like toys and Zephyrians perform aerial combat maneuvers that defied physics. Dinner was a solitary affair. As usual, the Academy's dining facilities could accommodate the nutritional needs of dozens of species simultaneously, creating a vast space filled with the sounds of different languages, eating habits, and social customs. Elena collected her human-compatible meal and found a seat at one of the smaller tables designed for medium-sized species. She ate while reviewing the day's notes on her data pad, occasionally glancing up to observe the social dynamics playing out around her. The elite cadets continued their networking and alliance building, forming the relationships that would define their military careers. Squadron formations were already emerging among the flight-capable species. The future ground commanders were establishing hierarchies based on combat performance and leadership potential. And the humans sat scattered throughout the dining hall, most eating alone or in small groups of their own kind, politely invisible to the larger currents of Academy politics. They were tolerated, even welcomed in a superficial sense, but never truly included in the conversations that mattered. Elena was finishing her meal when the announcement echoed through the dining hall's public address system. The familiar voice of Commandant Veltar, the Academy's commanding officer, called for attention in his authoritative tone. Attention all cadets. The quarterly War Games trials will commence in 2 weeks. Combat designations will be distributed tomorrow morning. All cadets are required to report to their respective combat coordinators upon receiving their assignments. These exercises will count toward your final academy rankings and future posting assignments. That is all. The dining hall erupted in excited conversation. War games are the Academy's most important practical exercises, simulating real combat conditions against sophisticated enemy AI systems. Performance in these trials could elevate promising cadets to advanced programs or doom struggling students to support roles in backwater systems. Elena felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and resignation that accompanied any major evaluation. She would receive her assignment, probably some logistics or technical support role appropriate for a human, and she would perform adequately while the alien cadets demonstrated the kinds of extraordinary capabilities that earned galactic recognition. Around her, the elite cadets were already speculating about their likely assignments. Throckmore's group discussed heavy assault scenarios with obvious anticipation. Zeph Allen's wing was comparing flight hours and aerial combat scores. Even the normally reserved Quartz cadets showed signs of excitement as they calculated probability matrices for various tactical scenarios. Elena gathered her belongings and made her way back to the dormitories, passing through corridors filled with animated discussions about combat strategies, weapon loadouts, and team formations. She nodded politely to the few humans she encountered, exchanging the kind of brief acknowledgments that characterized their interactions. Friendly enough, but ultimately superficial. Her dormitory room was small, but comfortable, designed to accommodate human physiology and psychological needs. The Academy had done extensive research to ensure each species felt at home, though Elena sometimes wondered if the human accommodations were based more on assumptions than actual understanding of what humans required. She sat at her small desk and opened her study materials for the next day's classes, but found her attention wandering to Professor Crickstall's strange questions. What would make humans unique? After 8 months surrounded by species with obvious evolutionary advantages, she had become used to thinking of humanity as galactic civilization's remedial students, earnest but ultimately limited. But there was something in the professor's tone that suggested a different perspective, as if he saw something in human potential that she herself had missed. The thought was both intriguing and troubling, because Elena had learned that false hope was more painful than honest recognition of limitations. She completed her evening study routine and prepared for sleep, wondering what tomorrow's combat designation would reveal about her place in the Galactic Order. In a few hours, she would discover exactly how the Academy's military leadership viewed her capabilities and potential. Outside her window, the Academy's vast training grounds stretched into darkness, illuminated by the soft glow of alien constellations. Thousands of cadets from across the galaxy slept in similar rooms, most of them confident in their species' contributions to galactic defense. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for the exceptional to distinguish themselves from the ordinary. Elena settled into sleep with the quiet acceptance of someone who had learned to expect little and hope for less. But somewhere in the back of her mind, Professor Crickstall's words echoed with persistent curiosity. Perhaps you simply have not yet discovered what makes your species unique. The Academy's automated systems hummed softly through the night, maintaining the complex environment that kept dozens of alien species healthy and functional. In the morning, combat designations would be distributed, and Elena Vasquez would discover that sometimes the galaxy's assumptions about human limitations were more wrong than anyone could have imagined. But for now, she slept peacefully, unaware that her name was already being discussed in classified communications channels that reached across star systems, or that certain individuals had been waiting 8 months for exactly this moment to arrive. The soft chime of Elena's personal communicator woke her 3 hours before the normal Academy reveille. She blinked at the unfamiliar timestamp glowing on her bedside display. 0347 hours ship time. In 8 months of Academy routine, she had never received communications at this hour. Emergency alerts went through the dormitory-wide systems, and personal messages waited until reasonable hours. She reached for the device with sleep-heavy fingers, expecting some kind of administrative error or automated reminder that had triggered at the wrong time. Instead, she found a brief message that made her suddenly, completely awake. Report to Classified Operations Center, Sublevel 7, immediately. Bring personal identification only. Tell no one. Commander Ashkant. Elena stared at the message, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood correctly. Commander Ashkant was the Academy's chief of Special Operations, a legendary Umbral whose shadow manipulation abilities had made her famous across the galaxy. Elena had never spoken to the commander directly, had never even been in the same room with her. Why would someone of that importance want to see a human cadet at this hour? She dressed quickly in her standard academy uniform, checking her appearance in the small mirror mounted beside her door. Her reflection looked back with the same unremarkable features that had characterized her entire academy experience. Average height, average build, brown hair kept in regulation length, dark eyes that revealed nothing extraordinary. She grabbed her identification card and left her room as quietly as possible, hoping not to wake her corridor mates. The Academy's corridors were dimly lit during night cycles, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere as she made her way toward the restricted levels. She passed automated security checkpoints that scanned her identification and biometrics, noting the increasing sophistication of the security measures as she descended deeper into the facility. Sublevel 7 was beyond the deepest levels she had ever accessed. Her student privileges had never extended below Sublevel 3, where some advanced technical courses were held. As the elevator descended, Elena felt her ears pop from the pressure changes and wondered what kind of facilities required this level of security and isolation. The doors opened onto a corridor unlike anything she had seen in the Academy's public areas. The walls were lined with exotic metals that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the air carried a subtle electromagnetic charge that made the hair on her arms stand up. Her footsteps echoed strangely in the space, as if the architecture itself was designed to disorient visitors. She followed the corridor markers toward the Classified Operations Center, passing sealed doors marked with warning symbols in dozens of alien languages. Whatever happened in these spaces was far beyond the scope of normal academy activities. Elena began to wonder if she was walking into some kind of disciplinary action. Perhaps her unremarkable performance had finally attracted the wrong kind of attention. The Operations Center's entrance was guarded by 2 Sentinel-class security androids, whose weapon systems tracked her movement as she approached. She presented her identification to the scanning array and waited while layers of security protocols verified her authorization to enter. The center itself was a vast circular chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps, tactical information, and data streams she couldn't begin to interpret. The scale and complexity of the operation was staggering. This was clearly a major command facility, not some minor academy administrative office. Commander Ashkent stood at the central console, her form shifting slightly as shadows moved across the room's dim lighting. The Umbral's natural ability to manipulate darkness made her appear simultaneously solid and ephemeral, as if she existed partially in normal space and partially in some darker dimension. Cadet Vasquez, the commander said without turning around. Her voice carried the distinctive harmonic undertones of her species, creating an almost musical quality that was both beautiful and slightly unsettling. Thank you for responding promptly. Elena approached the console and came to attention. Commander, you requested my presence, ma'am. Indeed I did. Commander Ashkent finally turned to face her, and Elena found herself looking into eyes that seemed to contain depths of shadow extending far beyond their physical boundaries. Tell me, Cadet, what do you know about humanity's admission to the Academy? The question was unexpected, but Elena responded with the standard information she had learned during orientation. Humanity was granted Academy access following first contact protocols. The Galactic Council recognized Earth's strategic location and our species' potential for military integration. The official story, yes. Commander Ashkent moved closer, her form seeming to glide across the floor rather than walk. But that explanation has always struck me as incomplete. Tell me, does it seem logical to you that the galaxy's premier military institution would admit an entire species based solely on strategic geography and optimistic potential? Elena considered the question carefully. She had wondered about this herself during her months at the Academy, especially when watching her classmates demonstrate abilities that humans simply could not match. I suppose it does seem unusual, Commander, but I assumed the Council had reasons beyond my understanding. Perhaps they did. The shadows around Commander Ashkent deepened, and Elena realized the Umbral was using her abilities to create privacy barriers around their conversation. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Your species' admission to the Academy was not a diplomatic courtesy. It was the result of a very specific request from individuals who believe humanity possessed unique capabilities that standard evaluation methods could not detect. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the shadows surrounding them. I'm not sure I understand, Commander. 3 years ago, during humanity's first contact with galactic civilization, your species was subjected to the standard battery of physical and psychological assessments. The results were exactly what you might expect. Humans appeared average in all measurable categories, with no obvious advantages compared to established galactic species. Commander Ashkent gestured, and the holographic displays around them shifted to show what appeared to be assessment data and psychological profiles. Elena recognized some of the testing protocols from her own Academy entrance examinations. However, the commander continued, certain individuals noticed anomalies in the human assessment data. Not deficiencies, anomalies. Patterns that suggested your species might possess capabilities that our standard testing was not designed to detect. The holographs changed again, showing complex analytical charts and probability matrices that were far beyond Elena's ability to interpret. But she could see highlighted sections and flagged data points that suggested significant statistical variations. These individuals petitioned for a more thorough evaluation period. They argued that humanity's true potential could only be assessed through extended observation under actual military conditions. The Academy became that testing environment. Elena felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to align in ways she had never imagined. Are you saying that every human at the Academy is part of an experiment? Not an experiment, Cadet. An evaluation. A very careful, very thorough evaluation designed to identify whether humans possess capabilities that could significantly impact galactic defense. Commander Ashkent's shadows shifted, creating new patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. And after 8 months of observation, we have reached some very interesting conclusions. The central holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional model of the Academy's training facilities. Red markers indicated various locations throughout the complex, each one labeled with timestamps and data classifications Elena couldn't read. Every human cadet has been monitored continuously since arrival, Commander Ashkent explained. Not just academic performance, everything. Stress responses, decision-making patterns under pressure, adaptability measures, social interaction analysis, even sleep cycle variations. We have compiled the most comprehensive psychological and behavioral database ever assembled for any species. Elena stared at the display, trying to process the implications. Every moment of her Academy experience had been observed and analyzed. Every conversation, every training exercise, every quiet moment in her dormitory room had been part of some vast evaluation process she had never suspected existed. The results, Commander Ashkent continued, have been remarkable. Not because humans excel in any single area, but because your species demonstrates adaptability patterns that we have never encountered before. You learn from failure in ways that actually enhance future performance, rather than simply avoiding repeated mistakes. You process complex information through intuitive leaps that bypass traditional analytical pathways. And Most intriguingly, you demonstrate what we call stress multiplication. Your capabilities actually increase under pressure conditions that would degrade performance in other species. Elena found herself thinking of the countless training exercises where she had felt like she was barely keeping up, struggling to match the natural abilities of her alien classmates. Had she actually been performing better than she realized? But there is one individual whose profile stands out even among these remarkable patterns, Commander Ashkent said, and the holographic display shifted to focus on a single data stream. Elena realized with growing unease that she was looking at her own assessment file. One human cadet, whose capabilities appear to extend far beyond even our expanded understanding of your species' potential. The data scrolling past showed performance metrics, psychological evaluations, and behavioral analyses spanning her entire academy tenure. Elena saw patterns in the information that she didn't understand, but the highlighted sections suggested something significant had been detected in her personal profile. Your academic performance has been consistently adequate, as you are well aware, Commander Ashkent continued. But your response patterns under stress conditions have been extraordinary. During combat simulations, your decision-making speed increases by factors that should be physiologically impossible. Under pressure conditions that cause other species to make more errors, you make fewer. And, most remarkably, you appear to process battlefield information through cognitive pathways that our analysis systems cannot fully map. Elena shook her head slowly. Commander, I think there might be some error in your data. I'm not exceptional at anything. I barely qualify in most training exercises. Barely qualify by alien standards, yes. But you consistently barely qualify in areas where humans should fail completely. Commander Ashkent gestured, and the display showed comparative performance charts. A Zephyrian pilot who performs at your level in aerial combat will be considered below average for their species. But humans are not supposed to be capable of aerial combat at all. A Goliathan who matches your tactical planning abilities would be unremarkable among their people. But human cognitive architecture should make complex tactical analysis extremely difficult. The implications began to sink in as Elena studied the comparative data. She wasn't excelling by alien standards, but she was consistently performing above human expectations across multiple categories that her species supposedly couldn't handle. There is more, Commander Ashkent said, and her shadows deepened until Elena felt like they were standing in a pocket of space separate from the rest of the universe. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected unusual activity near the void territories. The swarms are moving again, and early intelligence suggests they may be planning a major offensive against our outer colony worlds. Elena felt a chill of fear at the mention of the void swarms. Every species in galactic civilization shared a primal terror of those entities. Nightmarish creatures from dark space that consumed entire star systems and left nothing but emptiness behind. The Galactic Council is preparing defensive measures, but we face a significant problem. The swarms appear to have evolved new capabilities since our last major engagement. Our traditional tactical approaches may no longer be effective. We need something different, new strategies, new ways of thinking about combat that our existing military doctrine cannot provide. Commander Ashkent turned to face Elena directly, and the shadows around them seemed to pulse with urgency. Which brings us to your combat designation for the War Games, Cadet Vasquez. You are being assigned to a very special role, one that has never been tested before in Academy exercises. Elena waited, her heart beating faster as she sensed that whatever came next would change her life completely. You are being designated as a tactical wildcard, a combat role specifically designed to test whether human cognitive patterns can generate effective solutions to scenarios where conventional approaches have failed. You will be given command of a mixed-species unit and tasked with achieving objectives that our best tactical analysts believe are impossible under normal strategic frameworks. The weight of the assignment settled on Elena like a heavy blanket. A command position? For someone who had spent 8 months as the quiet cadet, who barely managed adequate performance. "Commander, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for command responsibilities. I don't have the leadership experience or the tactical training that other cadets have demonstrated." "You have something more valuable than training, Cadet," Commander Ashkant replied. "You have the ability to think in ways that the enemy cannot predict because you think in ways that even we cannot fully understand. The war games will test whether that cognitive difference can be weaponized effectively." Elena stared at the data displays surrounding them, trying to absorb the magnitude of what she was being asked to do. Lead a unit of alien cadets who had probably never taken orders from human, solve tactical problems that experienced military analysts considered impossible? The entire concept seemed beyond her capabilities. "What happens if I fail?" she asked quietly. "Then, humanity's evaluation period concludes with the determination that your species' potential, while interesting, is not sufficient for advanced military roles. Your people will be reassigned to support positions, and the galaxy will continue defending itself through conventional methods. And if I succeed..." Commander Ashkant's shadows shifted in what might have been a smile. "Then, everything changes, Cadet. For humanity, for the Academy, and for understanding of what warfare might become when human creativity is properly unleashed." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of an entire species' future settling on her shoulders. 8 months ago, she had arrived at the Academy expecting to blend into the background of galactic civilization. Now she was being asked to prove that humans deserve a place at the forefront of galactic defense. "When do the war games begin?" she asked. "Your unit assignment briefing is scheduled for 0800 hours. You have approximately 3 hours to prepare yourself mentally for what may be the most important tactical exercise in Academy history." Commander Ashkant gestured, and the privacy shadows began to dissipate. "Remember, Cadet, no one except those present in this room knows the true purpose of your assignment. As far as your classmates and instructors are concerned, you are simply another cadet receiving a War Games designation." Elena nodded, understanding the importance of maintaining cover for whatever evaluation process was taking place. She came to attention and saluted. "I understand, Commander. I won't disappoint you." "Disappoint me?" Commander Ashkant's form seemed to ripple with something that might have been amusement. "Cadet, you are about to attempt something that most of the galaxy believes is impossible. Whether you succeed or fail, you will provide valuable data about human potential under extreme pressure. The only way you could disappoint me would be by not trying." Elena left the Classified Operations Center with her mind spinning from the revelations of the past hour. As she made her way back through the Academy's corridors toward her dormitory, she tried to process the idea that her entire species was being evaluated based on the performance of a few dozen cadets, and that somehow she had been selected to carry the heaviest burden of that evaluation. The corridors were still empty as she returned to her room, but dawn was approaching, and soon the Academy would wake to another day of routine training and academic classes. For most of her classmates, today would bring the excitement of receiving War Games assignments that would test their established abilities and proven strengths. For Elena, today would begin a trial that would either prove humans belonged among the galaxy's premier warriors or confirm that they were destined to remain in the background of galactic civilization forever. She sat on her bed and stared out the window at the Academy's training grounds, now visible in the growing light of dawn. Somewhere out there, alien cadets were sleeping peacefully, confident in their species' proven capabilities and secure in their understanding of their place in the galactic order. In a few hours, Elena would meet the unit she was expected to lead into impossible situations with nothing but human ingenuity and desperation as her weapons. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But first, she had 3 hours to figure out how to become the kind of leader that could make the galaxy reevaluate everything it thought it knew about human potential. 3 hours to transform from the quiet cadet who avoided notice and as someone capable of commanding respect from aliens who had every reason to doubt her capabilities. 3 hours to become the human the galaxy had been waiting for, whether it knew it or not. Elena arrived at Assignment Bay 7 at precisely 0800 hours, her uniform crisp and her datapad loaded with standard tactical references she hoped might prove useful. The bay was one of the Academy's smaller briefing facilities, designed to accommodate teams rather than the massive groups that gathered for general lectures. As she approached the entrance, she could hear voices from multiple species engaged in animated conversation. She paused outside the door, taking a moment to steady her nerves. In 3 hours since leaving Commander Ashkent's briefing, she had managed perhaps 40 minutes of actual sleep, spending the rest of the time researching everything she could find about mixed species unit tactics and human command psychology. The materials had been discouraging. Most academic sources suggested that effective leadership required species-specific understanding that humans, as newcomers to galactic civilization, were unlikely to possess. Elena entered the briefing room and immediately understood why her assignment was going to be more challenging than she had anticipated. The 5 cadets already assembled represented some of the Academy's most promising students, each one a standout performer from their respective species. These weren't average cadets who might be willing to follow anyone's leadership. These were future elite officers who probably had very specific ideas about command hierarchies. Zeph Allen looked up from a tactical display he was studying with 2 of his wingmates. The Zephyrian's iridescent wings rustled with what Elena had learned to recognize as surprise, though whether pleasant or unpleasant remained unclear. "Cadet Vasquez," he said politely, "I did not expect to see you in our unit briefing." Near the room's environmental controls, a massive Goliathan female named Kithera turned to examine Elena with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for potential threats. Kithera had distinguished herself in every heavy combat exercise at the Academy, earning respect even from Throckmore's traditionalist faction. Her gray hide bore fresh ritual scars from a recent promotion ceremony, marking her as someone destined for battlefield command. "There must be some administrative error," Kithera rumbled in her deep voice. This briefing was designated for advanced tactical roles. At a workstation near the back of the room, a quartz being named Sylvand continued manipulating holographic mathematical models with their crystalline appendages, but Elena noticed the subtle shift in their geometric patterns that indicated increased attention. Quartz emotional responses were difficult for other species to read, but their body language followed mathematical principles that could be interpreted with careful observation. The 5th team member was someone Elena had never encountered before, a sleek, serpentine being with scales that shifted color in response to environmental conditions. The nameplate on their uniform identified them as Nyxera of the changeling species, one of the rarest admissions to the Academy. Changelings were renowned for infiltration and reconnaissance capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, making them incredibly valuable for special operations. Elena moved to the front of the room, where a tactical briefing console waited with her command codes already loaded. The simple action of accessing the command interface seemed to confirm her authority in a way that made the assembled cadets regard her with new uncertainty. "I understand your confusion," Elena began, choosing her words carefully. "I'm sure my assignment as unit commander seems unusual given our different performance levels during standard Academy exercises. I can't explain the reasoning behind the decision, but I can promise you that I'll do everything possible to ensure our mission succeeds." Zeph Allen's wings shifted to a more neutral position, suggesting cautious acceptance rather than outright skepticism. "What is our mission, Commander?" Elena activated the briefing system, and the room's central holographic display materialized with their assignment parameters. As she read through the mission details, her heart sank. Commander Ashkent had warned her that the objectives would be challenging, but the scenario presented on the screen was beyond difficult. It was genuinely impossible under conventional tactical doctrine. The War Games simulation placed their unit in command of a defensive position protecting a civilian evacuation site. The attacking force consisted of 3 full battalions with air support, heavy armor, and siege equipment. Their defensive resources included 50 infantry soldiers, basic fortifications, and limited ammunition supplies. The evacuation would require 6 hours to complete, and failure to protect the civilian population would result in massive casualties. Elena stared at the tactical display, running quick calculations in her head. 3 battalions represented nearly 3,000 enemy soldiers with full combat support. 50 defenders, even in prepared positions, should be overrun within the first hour of assault. The resource imbalance was so extreme that it resembled historical last stands rather than winnable tactical scenarios. This appears to be a command evaluation rather than a tactical exercise, Sylvan observed, their crystalline voice carrying harmonic overtones of analytical processing. The scenario parameters make conventional victory impossible. Kethera studied the enemy formation data with a warrior's eye for battlefield dynamics. The attacking force could overwhelm our position through direct assault alone, even without their support elements. This mission requires us to hold an indefensible position against impossible odds. Perhaps that is the point, Nixera suggested, their scales shifting to thoughtful blue-green patterns. If conventional tactics cannot succeed, then unconventional approaches become necessary. Elena nodded, grateful that at least one team member seemed willing to explore alternatives rather than focusing on the mission's impossibility. She manipulated the tactical display to show different views of the battlefield, searching for any advantage she might have overlooked in the initial assessment. The defensive position was a small outpost built on elevated ground, surrounded by open terrain that provided excellent fields of fire, but no natural obstacles to slow an advancing enemy. The civilian evacuation site was located 2 kilometers behind their position, connected by a single road that would become a death trap if enemy forces broke through. Standard doctrine would call for defense in depth, Elena said, thinking aloud as she studied the terrain. But we don't have the personnel for multiple defensive lines. We could try to channel the enemy into kill zones, but their numbers make that ineffective. Mobile defense might work, but we lack the vehicles for rapid repositioning. Zephalin's wings fluttered as he processed the aerial aspects of the battle. Enemy air support makes any defensive position vulnerable to bombardment. Even if we could hold against ground assault, their aircraft would suppress our positions until infantry could close to assault range. Elena found herself thinking about Professor Krickstall's question about human strengths and Commander Ashkin's comments about human cognitive patterns that couldn't be fully mapped by alien analysis systems. What could humans do that other species couldn't? What approach would be so unexpected that enemy commanders wouldn't have prepared for it? What if we don't try to defend the position? She said suddenly. The team turned to look at her with expressions of confusion and concern. Kethera's scarred features showed the kind of disapproval that Goliathan warriors reserved for suggestions of cowardice. The mission parameters require us to protect the evacuation site, the Goliathan growled. Abandoning our defensive position would expose the civilians to direct attack. I'm not talking about abandoning the position, Elena clarified, her mind racing as an idea began to form. I'm talking about not defending it in the conventional sense. What if instead of trying to stop 3 battalions from overrunning our position, we make it impossible for them to want to overrun our position? She manipulated the tactical display to highlight the enemy supply lines and communication networks. The attacking force was large and well-equipped, but that size created vulnerabilities that a smaller, more mobile force might be able to exploit. Large formations require extensive logistic support, she continued, her confidence growing as the tactical picture became clearer. Food, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, communication equipment. All of it has to be maintained through supply chains that stretch back to their base of operations. What happens if those supply chains start disappearing? Sylvan's crystalline structure brightened as they processed the implications. Disruption of enemy logistics would force tactical adjustments that could delay or modify their assault plans. However, Our unit lacks the resources for significant supply interdiction operations. Do we, though? Elena turned to Nixera, whose shape-shifting abilities opened possibilities that standard tactical doctrine never considered. How effectively could you infiltrate enemy positions if you had appropriate support and distraction? The changeling scales shifted to calculating patterns of silver and gold. With sufficient cover for initial approach, infiltration success probability exceeds 80%. However, a single operative cannot eliminate major supply installations. You wouldn't need to eliminate them, Elena replied. You would just need to make them unreliable. Contaminate fuel supplies, introduce targeting errors into ammunition loads, disrupt communication frequencies. Create enough uncertainty that enemy commanders start questioning their intelligence and logistics. Zephalin's wings extended to full span as excitement replaced his earlier skepticism. Aerial reconnaissance could identify priority targets and provide real-time intelligence for infiltration operations. Enemy air defenses will be configured for conventional threats, not for single aircraft operating at maximum stealth parameters. Elena felt the first stirrings of hope as her team began to engage with the unconventional approach. Kethera, your knowledge of siege warfare. What would happen to an attacking force if their heavy equipment started malfunctioning during critical assault phases? The Goliathan's expression shifted from disapproval to grudging interest. Equipment failures during assault operations cause massive tactical disruptions. Coordination between infantry and armor becomes impossible, communication systems fail, and unit cohesion breaks down rapidly. And still then, Elena continued, you can calculate probability matrices faster than any other species. What are the odds that an enemy commander would continue a major assault if multiple critical systems started failing simultaneously? The quartz being's geometric patterns shifted to complex mathematical configurations. Probability analysis indicates that cascading system failures would force operational reassessment. Enemy commanders would likely implement investigative protocols that could delay assault operations by 12 to 18 hours. Elena manipulated the tactical display to show her emerging plan. Instead of a conventional defense focused on holding ground, her strategy involved using each team member's unique capabilities to systematically undermine enemy effectiveness from within. Not through direct confrontation, but through the kind of psychological warfare that attacked enemy confidence rather than enemy positions. The civilians need 6 hours to complete evacuation, she summarized. If we can delay enemy assault operations for 18 hours, we accomplish the mission without ever fighting a traditional battle. Nixera's scales shifted to approving patterns of warm gold. Psychological operations designed to exploit enemy assumptions about conventional warfare. The approach has significant merit, particularly against opponents who prepare for standard tactical responses. Elena felt a surge of something she had rarely experienced during her academy tenure, genuine excitement about a military challenge. For the first time, she was working on a problem where human creativity and unpredictability might actually provide advantages rather than limitations. There are risks, she admitted. If enemy commanders figure out what we're doing, they could adapt faster than we could disrupt their operations. And if any part of our plan fails, we'll be facing 3 battalions with basically no defensive preparations. All warfare involves risk, Kethera observed. But this approach offers victory possibilities where conventional defense offers only honorable defeat. Zephalin's wings rustled with anticipation. When do we begin implementation? Elena checked the mission timeline. They had 4 hours to prepare before the exercise began, and another 2 hours before enemy forces would be in position to launch their assault. 6 hours to coordinate the most complex special operations mission she had ever imagined, using capabilities and tactics that had never been tested together. We start now, she said. Nixera, I need detailed intelligence on enemy camp layouts and security procedures. Zephalin, aerial reconnaissance of supply routes and communication installations. Sylvan, probability matrices for various disruption scenarios. Kythera, backup planning for direct engagement if our primary strategy fails. As her team dispersed to their preparation tasks, Elena remained at the tactical console, refining her plan and tried to anticipate the dozens of ways it could go catastrophically wrong. She was asking 5 elite cadets to trust leadership from someone they had every reason to doubt, using tactics that had never been attempted in academy exercises. But for the first time since arriving at the academy, Elena felt like she was working on a problem that suited her abilities rather than highlighting her limitations. Human creativity, adaptability under pressure, and willingness to take risks that more conventional military minds would reject. Perhaps these were the strengths that Commander Ashkent had identified in her species' psychological profiles. In 3 hours, she would discover whether human unconventional thinking could succeed where alien military excellence might fail. The war games would test more than just tactical capabilities. They would test whether humanity deserved a place among the galaxy's premier warriors, or whether they should remain forever in the background of galactic civilization. Elena stared at the tactical display, showing the impossible mission that would determine her species' future, and for the first time in 8 months, she smiled with genuine anticipation rather than quiet resignation. The War Games exercise began at 1,400 hours with a kind of precision that characterized all Academy operations. Elena stood in the command bunker of their defensive position, watching multiple tactical displays that showed enemy forces moving into assault positions with methodical efficiency. 3 battalions of simulated enemies, represented by advanced combat drones programmed with sophisticated AI behaviors, approached their small outpost with overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower. Through her headset, she could hear the confident chatter of enemy commanders coordinating their attack. The exercise AI was programmed to simulate realistic military communications, and the virtual enemy officers displayed exactly the kind of professional competence that made their tactical situation appear hopeless under conventional analysis. Enemy advance elements reaching preliminary positions, Zeph Allen reported from his high-altitude reconnaissance position. His voice carried the calm precision of someone accustomed to aerial operations, but Elena could detect underlying tension as he observed the massive force arrayed against them. Main body approximately 40 minutes from assault range. Elena keyed her communicator to check on Nyxera's infiltration progress. The changeling had departed 2 hours ago, using natural camouflage and shape-shifting abilities to penetrate enemy lines while their attention focused on approaching the human defensive position. Nyxera, status report. Infiltration successful, came the whispered reply. I have accessed their primary supply depot and identified 3 critical systems for disruption. Fuel contamination is underway. Ammunition systems are vulnerable to interference, and their communication array has inadequate security protocols. Elena felt her first surge of genuine optimism since the exercise began. Her team's unconventional approach was proceeding according to plan, with each member exploiting their unique capabilities in ways that enemy commanders had never been trained to counter. Still then, probability update on enemy response to system failures. The Quartz being's harmonious voice carried complex mathematical undertones as they processed real-time tactical data. Current probability matrices indicate 73% likelihood that initial system failures will trigger investigative protocols. Enemy commander psychological profiles suggest high confidence levels that will make them resistant to abandoning prepared assault plans. That analysis aligned with Elena's expectations. Experienced military commanders didn't abandon major operations because of equipment problems. They identified and fixed the problems while maintaining operational momentum. Her plan required more than simple sabotage to succeed. Kythera, how are our defensive preparations? Standard fortifications complete. The Goliathan replied from her position, overseeing their 50 simulated infantry soldiers. However, I have also implemented your requested modifications. Defensive positions now appear more formidable than actual capabilities suggest, while maintaining mobility options for rapid redeployment. Elena nodded with satisfaction. Her backup plan required the ability to make their defensive position appear stronger than it actually was, while preserving options for tactical withdrawal if their primary strategy failed. Goliathan military engineering made such deception possible through creative use of field fortifications. The tactical displays showed enemy forces continuing their advance with mechanical precision. Elena watched battalion commanders positioning their units according to textbook assault doctrine, preparing for a frontal attack that would overwhelm her position through superior firepower and numerical advantage. Everything about their approach indicated confidence in conventional military superiority. Nixera, initiate Phase 1 disruption. Acknowledged. Beginning fuel contamination sequence. Elena switched her attention to the enemy logistics displays, watching for the first signs that her unconventional strategy was taking effect. Elena watched tactical displays showing the massive assault force maintaining positions while hundreds of vehicles and weapons systems underwent operational testing. Still then, updated probability analysis. Equipment concerns are generating investigative responses as predicted. However, enemy commanders remain committed to assault timeline. Current probability of mission abandonment remains below 15%. Elena had expected this. Professional military officers wouldn't cancel major operations because of equipment glitches. But her strategy didn't require mission abandonment. It just required enough uncertainty to create tactical opportunities that her team could exploit. Nixera, Phase 2 implementation. Beginning ammunition interference protocols. While the Changeling initiated her second wave of sabotage, Elena turned her attention to the psychological warfare component of her plan. Enemy commanders were dealing with equipment problems that suggested maintenance failures rather than hostile action. Her next objective was to introduce patterns that would make them question whether they were facing sabotage, espionage, or simple operational breakdown. Zephalin, begin pattern creation flights. Acknowledged. Initiating reconnaissance missions designed to suggest observation capabilities beyond actual resources. Elena watched her aerial reconnaissance coordinator execute carefully planned flight patterns that would appear on enemy sensors as evidence of sophisticated surveillance operations. By varying altitude, approach angles, and observation duration, Zephalin could create the impression that their small defensive unit possessed intelligence-gathering capabilities that threatened enemy operational security. The effect on enemy communications was immediate and dramatic. Battalion intelligence were tracking aerial reconnaissance assets that suggest enemy capability assessments may be incomplete. Request guidance on counter-surveillance protocols. All units implement electronic security measures. Assume enemy intelligence operations are more sophisticated than initial estimates indicated. Elena felt satisfaction as she heard uncertainty entering enemy command decisions. Professional military commanders were trained to gather complete intelligence before major operations, and evidence suggesting gaps in their enemy assessment created exactly the kind of tactical hesitation her plan required. Phase 2 complete, Nixera reported. Ammunition systems are now showing intermittent targeting errors and communication disruptions. Enemy technical personnel are conducting diagnostic procedures that will require significant time to complete. The tactical displays showed growing confusion in enemy formations as unit commanders tried to balance operational timelines with equipment reliability concerns. Some battalions were maintaining assault readiness, while others implemented extended diagnostic protocols. The massive coordination that made 3-battalion operations effective was beginning to break down. Enemy command is implementing revised timeline, SIL then reported. Assault operations delayed by estimated 47 minutes, while technical issues undergo resolution. Elena allowed herself a moment of genuine hope. 47 minutes represented significant progress toward her 18-hour delay target, and they had only begun implementing her full strategy. But She also knew that military commanders would eventually recognize sabotage patterns and adapt their operations accordingly. Kethera begins psychological reinforcement operations. Acknowledged. Implementing defensive displays designed to suggest capabilities beyond actual resources. Elena watched her team's final psychological operation unfold through multiple sensor feeds. Kethera used mobile defensive positions and coordinated movement patterns to create the impression that their small unit possessed significantly more personnel and equipment than actual inventories indicated. To enemy observers using long-range surveillance, their defensive position would appear to be held by several hundred soldiers with advanced heavy weapons. The effect on enemy planning was exactly what Elena had hoped for. Intelligence assessment revision required. Came the voice of an enemy commander. Defensive position shows evidence of reinforcement beyond initial estimates. Enemy capabilities may include rapid deployment resources not identified in preliminary reconnaissance. All units hold current positions pending updated intelligence analysis. We cannot proceed with assault operations based on incomplete enemy assessment. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized her strategy was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections. Enemy commanders weren't just dealing with equipment problems. They were questioning their fundamental understanding of the tactical situation. Current delay estimate now exceeds 4 hours, Sylvan reported with harmonic undertones of satisfaction. Enemy commanders are implementing comprehensive reevaluation protocols that will require extensive time to complete. Through her tactical displays, Elena watched 3 battalions of sophisticated combat units maintaining positions while their commanders wrestled with uncertainty that her small team had systematically introduced into every aspect of their operation. Equipment problems, intelligence gaps, and capability assessments were combining to create exactly the kind of operational paralysis that could provide the 18 hours needed for civilian evacuation. But Elena also knew that her strategy carried significant risks. Professional military commanders would eventually identify the patterns suggesting sabotage rather than random equipment failure. When that happened, they would adapt their operations to counter her unconventional approach. All team members, prepare for Phase 3 implementation, she announced. Enemy commanders will eventually recognize our operational pattern. When they do, we need to be ready for direct confrontation using conventional defensive tactics. Defensive positions are prepared for transition to standard combat operations if psychological tactics become ineffective. Elena stared at the tactical displays, showing enemy forces frozen in positions of overwhelming superiority, held in place by nothing more than uncertainty and doubt rather than actual defensive capabilities. Her team had accomplished something that traditional military doctrine would have considered impossible. They had stopped a major assault through psychological warfare rather than physical resistance. But she also knew that their success was temporary. Enemy commanders would eventually overcome their uncertainty and proceed with operations designed to overwhelm any defensive position through sheer numerical advantage. When that happened, her small team would face the kind of direct combat that should result in immediate defeat. The next 6 hours would determine whether human creativity and adaptability could continue finding solutions when conventional tactics had reached their limits. The war games were testing more than just military capabilities. They were testing whether humanity deserved a place among the galaxy's premier warriors, or whether their initial success had been nothing more than temporary luck. Elena took a deep breath and prepared for the most challenging phase of operations, knowing that everything her species had worked toward depended on her ability to continue finding impossible solutions to impossible problems. Hour 7 of the war games brought the moment Elena had been dreading since the exercise began. Enemy communications traffic suddenly shifted from confused uncertainty to crisp, professional determination as their commanders finally identified the sabotage patterns that had paralyzed their operations. All units, this is Colonel Vextar, came the voice of the enemy's senior commander, transmitted with the kind of cold authority that characterized experienced military officers. Intelligence analysis confirms hostile infiltration and psychological warfare operations. We are facing a sophisticated enemy using unconventional tactics designed to exploit our operational assumptions. Elena listened to the enemy command frequency with growing tension, knowing that her strategy's effectiveness had just been severely compromised. Professional military commanders were trained to adapt to unexpected situations, and Colonel Vextar's response demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical flexibility that made enemy AI systems so challenging to defeat. New operational parameters are now in effect, the colonel continued. Assume all equipment problems are the result of hostile action. Implement security protocols designed for special operations environments. Combat units will proceed with assault operations using backup systems and manual coordination protocols. Through her tactical displays, Elena watched 3 battalions of sophisticated combat units beginning to move with renewed purpose. Equipment problems that had created hours of delay were now being bypassed through alternative operational procedures. Intelligence gaps were being filled through direct reconnaissance rather than remote surveillance. And capability assessments were being replaced by overwhelming firepower designed to succeed regardless of defensive sophistication. Enemy formations resuming advance. Zeph Allen reported from his aerial observation position. Estimated time to assault range, now 37 minutes. Elena felt her chest tighten as she realized that her unconventional strategy had bought them approximately 6 hours of delay, but enemy commanders were now implementing countermeasures that would neutralize further psychological operations. The civilian evacuation still required 12 more hours to complete, and her team was about to face direct combat against impossible odds. All team members, return to defensive positions, she ordered. We're transitioning to conventional defensive tactics. Acknowledged, Nixera replied as her infiltration mission became too dangerous to continue. Enemy security protocols now make further sabotage operations inadvisable. Elena watched her team members moving to their assigned positions in the defensive perimeter, each one preparing for the kind of direct confrontation that should result in their immediate defeat. 50 simulated infantry soldiers against 3 battalions with full combat support represented the kind of numerical disadvantage that no amount of defensive preparation could overcome. But as she studied the tactical situation, Elena began to notice something unexpected in the enemy formations. Colonel Vextar's adaptation to her psychological warfare had been professionally competent, but it had also created new vulnerabilities that traditional military doctrine hadn't anticipated. Enemy units were now operating under special operations protocols that emphasized security over efficiency. Communication procedures designed to prevent infiltration were also slowing coordination between different battalion elements. Equipment redundancy that protected against sabotage was also reducing overall operational capability. And manual coordination that bypassed compromised computer systems was creating opportunities for exploitation that Elena's human creativity might be able to identify. Still then, I need probability analysis for a new tactical approach, she said, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Specify parameters for analysis. The coords being replied from their position monitoring enemy communications. Elena manipulated her tactical display to highlight the coordination gaps that were appearing in enemy formations as they implemented counter-sabotage procedures. What happens if we abandon static defensive positions and transition to mobile harassment tactics designed to exploit enemy coordination delays? Clarification required, Silden responded. Mobile operations would expose our personnel to superior enemy firepower without providing defensive advantages. Not if we're not trying to win through direct confrontation, Elena explained, her confidence growing as she developed the tactical concept. What if our objective is to make enemy coordination so difficult that they can't effectively focus their superior firepower? She began sketching tactical movements on her display, showing how small, mobile units could exploit the timing gaps that enemy security procedures had created. Instead of trying to stop 3 battalions through defensive firepower, her new strategy involved making it impossible for 3 battalions to coordinate their overwhelming advantages. Kethera, your assessment. Can our personnel maintain mobility under enemy fire while conducting coordinated harassment operations? The Goliathans studied Elena's tactical concepts with a warrior's understanding of battlefield dynamics. Mobility tactics require abandoning defensive positions that provide protection from superior firepower. However, enemy coordination delays may create opportunities for exploitation if timing can be precisely controlled. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized that her team's unique capabilities might provide advantages that conventional military analysis couldn't predict. Zephyrian flight coordination, changeling infiltration skills, Quartz mathematical precision, Goliathan combat experience, and human adaptability, combined properly, they might be able to achieve tactical effects that no single species could accomplish alone. New mission parameters, she announced to her team. We're not trying to hold this position anymore. We're trying to make it impossible for enemy forces to take any position effectively. She rapidly outlined her revised strategy, which involved abandoning their defensive fortifications in favor of coordinated mobile operations that would attack enemy coordination rather than enemy personnel. Each team member would use their species' unique capabilities to create specific types of operational chaos that would cascade into broader tactical paralysis. Zeph Allen, aerial coordination of ground movement patterns designed to split enemy attention between multiple simultaneous threats. Nixera, infiltration operations focused on communication disruption rather than equipment sabotage. Sylvan, real-time probability calculations for optimal timing of harassment activities. Kethera, mobile defense coordination that forces enemy units to respond to threats from multiple directions. As her team began implementing the new strategy, Elena realized that she was attempting something that had never been tested in Academy exercises, using mixed species capabilities to create tactical effects that were greater than the sum of individual contributions. Human military doctrine had always emphasized overwhelming force or defensive superiority, but Elena's approach focused on making enemy superiority impossible to coordinate effectively. The results were immediate and dramatic. Enemy battalions that had been advancing with renewed confidence suddenly found themselves facing threats that appeared and disappeared faster than their coordination protocols could track. Mobile harassment teams struck communication nodes, supply convoys, and command positions with precisely timed attacks that created maximum confusion while avoiding direct confrontation with superior firepower. What is happening to our operational coordination? Elena heard Colonel Vextar demand through intercepted enemy communications. Units are reporting contact with enemy forces that disappear before response can be coordinated. Sir, the enemy appears to be using mobility tactics that exploit gaps in our security protocols, came the reply from an enemy staff officer. They're not trying to defeat our units directly. They're trying to make unit coordination impossible. Elena watched her tactical displays, showing enemy formations becoming increasingly disorganized as her team's harassment operations created cascading coordination failures. 3 battalions of sophisticated combat units were being reduced to individual company actions because their communication and coordination systems couldn't adapt fast enough to track multiple simultaneous threats. Enemy operational effectiveness declining rapidly, Sylvan reported with harmonic satisfaction. Current probability calculations suggest enemy commanders will be forced to choose between operational coordination and security protocols. The choice that Elena's strategy had forced on enemy commanders was exactly what she had hoped to achieve. Colonel Vextar could maintain the security procedures that protected against infiltration and sabotage, but those procedures made battalion-level coordination almost impossible. Or he could restore coordination efficiency, but that would make his formations vulnerable to the same psychological warfare that had initially paralyzed his operations. All enemy units implement dispersed operations protocols, Colonel Vextar finally ordered company-level actions only with independent coordination. Abandon battalion-level tactical integration until enemy mobility operations can be contained. Elena felt a surge of triumph as she heard enemy commanders abandoning the numerical superiority that should have guaranteed their victory. By forcing them to disperse into smaller units, her strategy had eliminated their primary advantage while creating opportunities for her team to engage enemy companies individually rather than facing 3 coordinated battalions. Enemy coordination breakdown complete, she announced to her team. Begin final phase operations, selective engagement with isolated enemy units using overwhelming local superiority. What followed was unlike any military exercise in Academy history. Elena's small team, supported by their 50 infantry soldiers, began engaging individual enemy companies that had been isolated from their parent formations. Instead of facing impossible odds, they were creating local situations where their forces achieved temporary numerical parity or even advantage. Zeph Allen's aerial coordination allowed them to identify vulnerable enemy units and coordinate precise timing for concentrated attacks. Nixera's infiltration capabilities provided intelligence on enemy positions and intentions that made tactical surprises possible. Sylvan's probability calculations optimized engagement timing to maximize success while minimizing casualties. And Kethera's combat experience ensured that each engagement was executed with professional competence. Within 4 hours, Elena's team had effectively neutralized 2 of the 3 enemy battalions through a combination of tactical defeats and operational paralysis. The remaining enemy units were scattered across the battlefield in small groups that posed no threat to the civilian evacuation site. Exercise termination came the announcement from Academy Command at Hour 13 of the War Games. Defensive objectives achieved. Enemy assault operations have been rendered ineffective through unconventional tactical implementation. Elena stood in her mobile command position, surrounded by the tactical displays that had tracked the most successful military exercise of her life. Her team had accomplished something that conventional analysis had declared impossible. They had defeated overwhelming enemy superiority through tactics that no alien military doctrine had anticipated. But the true significance of their victory became apparent 3 days later, when Elena received another early morning summons to the Classified Operations Center. Commander Ashkent waited in the same circular chamber where Elena's Academy experience had taken an unexpected turn 2 weeks earlier. But this time, the umbral shadows carried undertones of satisfaction and anticipation rather than analytical curiosity. "Congratulations, Cadet Vasquez," the commander began. "Your performance during the War Games has provided exactly the data we needed to complete humanity's evaluation period." Elena came to attention, though her heart was beating faster as she anticipated what those results might reveal about her species' future in galactic civilization. "The assessment conclusions are remarkable," Commander Ashkent continued. "Human cognitive patterns do indeed provide capabilities that standard evaluation methods cannot detect. Your species demonstrates strategic creativity, adaptability under pressure, and tactical innovation that significantly exceed galactic norms." The commander gestured, and holographic displays around them showed Elena's tactical decisions compared to thousands of previous War Games scenarios involving alien cadets. The analysis revealed patterns that Elena herself hadn't recognized during the exercise. "Most significantly," Commander Ashkent explained, "humans appear capable of integrating diverse alien capabilities into tactical frameworks that exceed the effectiveness of single-species operations. Your victory wasn't achieved through human superiority. It was achieved through human ability to optimize mixed-species coordination in ways that no other species has demonstrated." Elena felt her breath catch as she realized the implications. Humanity's strength wasn't individual excellence, but the ability to bring out the best in other species while finding creative solutions that purely alien thinking might never discover. Based on these findings, The Galactic Council has approved a significant expansion of human participation in galactic defense operations, Commander Ashkin announced. Humanity will be granted full military integration status, with humans specifically designated for command positions in mixed-species units. Elena stared at the data displays, showing her species' future among the stars. In 8 months, she had gone from the quiet cadet who barely qualified for academy admission to the first human to demonstrate that her species belonged among the galaxy's premier warriors. "There is one more thing, Cadet Vasquez," Commander Ashkent said, her shadows shifting in patterns Elena had learned to recognize as satisfaction. "The Galactic Council has requested that you remain at the Academy as an instructor, teaching mixed species tactical coordination to future officer candidates from across galactic civilization." Elena realized that her combat designation would become more than just a war games exercise. It would become her permanent identity as the human who had shown the galaxy that sometimes the greatest strength came not from individual power, but from the ability to help others discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. From the quiet cadet who stayed silent in class to the officer who would teach alien species new ways to fight together, Elena's journey had proven that humans had always possessed exactly the qualities the galaxy needed. They had just never been given the opportunity to demonstrate them. As she left Commander Ashkin's briefing and returned to the academy corridors where her adventure had begun, Elena smiled at the alien cadets who passed her with new recognition and respect. The galaxy had finally learned what humans could contribute to galactic civilization. Not the strongest weapons or the fastest ships, but the creativity to find ways for everyone to fight more effectively together. And, in the end, that might be the most valuable military capability of all.